Hi, this week we're discussing setting up a sound system for the church and the 5 steps you can use to do it in 30 minutes. I'm Bill Polk, and this is The Polk Effect. Hi guys, and welcome back to The Polk Effect. And as I said before, this week we're discussing setting up a sound system for the church and the 5 steps you can use, not 10, 5 steps you can use to do it in 30 minutes. Well, let's get started. But before we do, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves in the comments? We'd love to know the size of your team, the makeup of your team, male, female, the age range of your team, and the experience level of the team. We can't wait to read your comments and get to know you just a little bit better. All right, let's go. Okay, let's start by demystifying the structure of a sound system. I'm going to give you a simple formula that will break down the basic structure of any sound system. That's right, any sound system. So get a pad, get a pen, and write this down, because here we go. You ready? Mic/instrument, cable, console, cable, amplifier, cable, speaker. That's variation 1. Let's go through it one more time. Mic/instrument, cable, console, cable, amplifier, cable, speaker. Variation 1. All right, so let's give you a second variation of that same formula. This one's a little different, and so let's see if you can figure out what's different about it. Here we go. Mic/instrument, cable, console, cable, speaker. Did you get it? Variation 2. Mic/instrument, cable, console, cable, speaker. All right. Now that you have the formula, how about we go ahead and give you those steps? Step number 1, know your equipment. Oh my gosh, Bill, really? Know my equipment? Come on. Hey. That's the step. Step number 1, know your equipment. The reason you need to know your equipment is because that will dictate what components need to be included in the kit that you will be putting together. Get it? You will be putting together so that you can put together a sound system for the church in 30 minutes. All right, I'll prove it to you by going through the formula. First item in the formula is what? Mic/instrument. So let's address that. All right, mic/instrument. Let's address the microphones and let's find out what the microphone tells us about our kit. On the back of any microphone, it doesn't matter whether it's a dynamic microphone, a condenser microphone, a wireless microphone, a lapel mic, doesn't matter. The outputs on microphones are XLR. Now, if we're going to follow the formula, following the mic comes the cable. And this is what we know, that if you have an output, that the cable then must match the output. In other words, the connector on the back of the component must match the cable that you're connecting to the component. So if we have an XLR output on the back of all microphones, then we obviously need an XLR cable. So let's start with the formula. Mic, we're not doing instruments right now. Mic, XLR output, cable has to be an XLR input into the XLR output, and we're going to follow that down to the console. And when we look at the input section of the console, we realize 2 things. It has 2 types of inputs. It will either have a 1/4-inch input or an XLR input. And in as much as we have an XLR cable, which input do you think we'll be using? That's right, XLR input. We've already now followed the formula through to the console. Mic, cable, console. XLR output, XLR cable, XLR input, and we're into the console. Now, let's look at the instruments. Okay, so the instrument side of the formula tells us a little different story. Acoustic instruments need to be picked up by microphones. So we understand how that's going to connect because we just went through the mic side of the formula. But electronic instruments, bass guitar, electric guitar, synthesizer, electric piano, they have 1/4 inch outputs. And as we said with the microphones, the output connector has to match the connector on the cable. So if I have an output that's a 1/4 inch, then I will need what? A 1/4 inch cable to connect to that. Now, we said a minute ago that the inputs into the console are both XLR and 1/4 inch. Now I have a 1/4 inch cable. The problem is, unless all the instruments that have 1/4 inch outputs are going to sit right on the console, you cannot connect them to the console. So we need another component, and that component is called a direct injection box, or more commonly known as a DI box. Here's what's interesting about a DI box. A DI box has both a 1/4 inch input and an XLR output. So are you seeing how we're moving now to the connection of the electronic instruments? So we have a 1/4 inch output on the electronic instrument. We're going to need a 1/4 inch cable, but the other end of that 1/4 inch cable has to plug into the 1/4 inch input on the DI box, and the output of the DI box is XLR, and we'll do with that the same thing we did with the microphones and take the XLR cable, connect it to the DI box, and the other end will plug into an XLR input into the console. So now let's look at the makeup of our kit so far. Okay, so a quick review of our kit reveals this. We have microphones. We're going to need microphones for all of our vocals. So we'll have lead vocals or speakers. We'll have praise team singers, and we may even have choir. So we'll need microphones for each and XLR cables for each of those components. Now we've just said that our acoustic instruments need microphones. So we're now going to create additional microphones in our kit for drums, for horns, for percussions. Again, now that kit is growing. We realized that electronic instruments have 1/4 inch outputs, so they need 1/4 inch cables. So now we have electronic instruments and 1/4 inch cables, but for every 1/4 inch cable, we need a direct injection box or a DI box. And for every DI box, we need yet again additional XLR cables so that they can connect to the console. So now we see how knowing our equipment and following the formula dictates what components need to be included in our kit. Okay, let's move on to the output side of the console. Before we move on to the output side of the console, let's look back at the formula structure, the two variations that I gave you in the formula. Variation 1, mic/instrument cable, console cable, amplifier cable, speaker. And variation 2, mic/instrument cable, console cable, speaker, vary in one component. One has an amplifier and the other one does not. Variation 1 is using passive speakers. A passive speaker is a speaker that has no power component, no amplification built within the cabinet. The only thing in the cabinet is the driver. So in order to power and to amplify that speaker, you need another component, which is an amplifier, which carries with it the amplification module and the power module. And you need to put that in the chain. Hence, Mic/instrument cable, console cable, amplifier, cable, speaker. The only way to use a passive speaker is with an amplifier. Whereas variation 2 is using something we call an active speaker or a powered speaker. An active speaker is a self-contained unit. It has the drivers, it has an amplification module, and it has a power component built into the cabinet. So much so that if you needed to, you could actually plug a microphone into the back of a powered speaker and use that as a standalone unit. So now you know the difference between the two variations. Variation 1 uses a passive speaker, which requires an amplifier to power that speaker, whereas variation 2 utilizes an active speaker, which is a self-contained unit. All right. Okay, looking at the console, we've already realized that it has an input section, which is XLR and 1/4 inch. And now we're looking at the output section. Now understand, a console has way more sections than the two that I'm addressing right now, but we're trying to simplify the structure. All right, so right now we're just going to discuss the input and the output section. We've already covered the input section when we covered microphones. So we're going to focus on the output section. And the good thing about a console is that most of the connectors are the same for output and for input. So in the output section, you will have an XLR out or 1/4 inch out. You'll have various output sections. You'll have your main output, which is for your main house speakers. You'll have the auxiliary outputs, which are oftentimes utilized for monitor mixes. You'll have a group output that can be used for any other kind of feed. And then you oftentimes will have a matrix output that you can use for video recording, for CD recordings, or should you have somebody filming, an external camera crew come in, you can give them a feed off the console via the matrix and they'll be able to record whatever they're recording. But the good thing about all those output sections, each of them will have either a 1/4 inch or an XLR output. So the output section is simple. Now, as we said before, the output connector has to match with the cable that you're going to be utilizing. So if you're using the XLR output, then of course you're going to need an XLR cable. If you're using the 1/4 inch output, you will need a 1/4 inch cable. Again, the kid is growing. But what you'll really need to understand in order to determine which one you're going to need is what does the input of the speaker you're connecting to have on it. A powered speaker will have generally an XLR and a 1/4 inch input, whereas a passive speaker generally will have 1/4 inch inputs. Now, if you're using the passive speaker variation, then of course you'll need an amplifier in between the console and the speaker. Amplifiers often take XLR inputs and they can take 1/4 inch inputs, so you really won't have much of a mismatch with the output of the console to the amplifier. And then you'll just have to make sure that you use the appropriate output of the amplifier to connect to the passive speaker, which will be either an XLR or a 1/4 inch off that amplifier. They have other speaker connectors, but generally it's going to be a 1/4 inch off the amplifier into the passive speaker. Variation 2, as we said earlier, is an active speaker, and like we mentioned, it has 1/4 inch XLR input, so whichever output type you decide to use will easily accommodate your active speaker. Let's recap real quick. So far, we've broken down for you the basic structure of any sound system, and we've given you a simple formula that breaks down the basic structure of any sound system. We also gave you step 1 of our 5 steps that you can use to set up a sound system for your church. In step 1, we said that you need to know your equipment. And by using the formula, we showed you that by knowing your equipment, it will dictate to you what components you need to have in the kit that you will be putting together so that you can set up the sound system for your church in 30 minutes. Hopefully that information has been very, very helpful for you. If it has, by all means, please hit the like button or leave us a comment. And also in the comments, if you can leave us information about subjects you would love to see us discuss in the future, we'd be happy to cover those for you. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and tell your friends and your team about us. In our next episode, we'll cover steps 2 and steps 3 of our 5 steps. That's my time. Remember, you can serve in excellence. And I'm Bill Polk, and this is the Polk Effect.